And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, new details on Apple's next generation of the iPhone. The iPhone 10 has just hit stores, but the company is already at work adding new technology to its upcoming device. Plus, Airbnb hits a new milestone. The company continues its streak of posting a profit, hitting $1 billion in revenue. Can the rental startup keep growing? And as the debate over tax reform continues in Congress, we'll discuss the impact for the tech industry from big cap companies to startups. First, to our lead. Apple continues its never-ending cycle to ramp up the technology used in the iPhone. The company plans to take another step toward turning the smartphone into an AR augmented reality device. According to people familiar with the matter, Apple's working on a rear-facing 3D sensor system for the iPhone in 2019. It's a different technology from the new iPhone X's Face ID system. Joining us now, the man behind this Bloomberg scoop, Bloomberg Tech's Alex Webb. Also with us, our Bloomberg editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So, Alex, what exactly does this new sensor involve? So,
at the moment, what you have on the back of your phone, you've got two cameras if you've got the iPhone 10, and this allows a certain amount of depth perception, but it's not terribly accurate. What Apple's looking at doing is not the 2018 iPhone, it's the 2019 iPhone, so essentially 2 phones away from the iPhone 10, is adding this depth perception on the back, which allows them to do a lot more complicated augmented reality things with the front-facing, rear-facing camera.
So would this impact any of the current technology and the Face ID, or this is something completely separate?
It's something entirely separate. If you're a laser maker, it's probably good news, because at the moment there are 2 lasers on the side of your phone where there's a screen, which allows Face ID to work. There'll be another one on the back. And the example I think of is if you take a Monopoly board, and at the moment a virtual Monopoly board, you with ARKit can place a virtual Monopoly board on this table. The problem is, if you then put your hand into that field of view, it does not know that there's a hand there, and it ruins the whole illusion. Adding a 3D sensor could theoretically allow you to pick up a virtual top hat, for instance, and move it 8 squares to the next space, and it would appear like that on your screen.
Corey, it's not surprising that they would be.
I want to hear him talk about English Monopoly, which does not have a park place, but please.
It's not surprising that Apple would already be pushing forward on technology for an iPhone maybe 1, 2, 3 generations out from now. But what do you make of this, knowing what we know now about Apple's broader AR strategy?
Well, I think that Apple looks at what's happened in the PC industry, where we've seen people just decide that we've gotten to a point in PCs where there's no compelling reason to get a new model every year or even every other year, and that the replacement cycle has slowed down for PCs, but it's also slowed down for tablets. And we see people still replace their tablets, but at a much slower pace. And they're worried about that, of course, with the phone business, where people still have wanted to get a new phone within a, say, 18-month period, maybe even 12-month period, but they don't want that to slow down. And they need to find something compelling enough to get people to want to upgrade their phones. And this is that kind of thing that is a big leap in one direction.
And I think the thing that's interesting in that particular context is there are 2 production phones out at the moment from Lenovo and Asus which have this kind of technology already. It kind of shows that Apple's maybe dripping the advances because it wants to kind of milk this cycle and then the next cycle, rather than pumping all the technology into the phone as soon as they can, because it leaves them little room to advance the next generation.
So our colleague Mark Gurman had a scoop out last week about Apple working on AR headsets. How does this tie into that?
It in some ways could be seen as a foundation stone, because we've seen with ARKit there are increasing numbers of augmented reality-based apps going into the App Store. The more content, the big problem with augmented reality glasses at the moment is there's not a huge amount of content out there which makes it worth people buying the thing. Now, if Apple's building a whole ground foundation of AR content, it could then hopefully, they would say, parlay that into smart glasses in 3, 4, 5 years' time.
And don't get the AirPods as well, that they have got the ability to do a lot of things with AR, using AirPods as well. So this augmented reality stuff with the AirPods, maybe with some kind of glasses thing as well, could be somewhere that they go. But I think fundamental to this is the thing that when they developed the development tools for this, because if you think about what they did with Pokemon Go, it was really groundbreaking stuff, but they had to build that from the first ones and zeros all the way up to the top. Now with ARKit, really developers can get a real real head start, and we might see real advances in this quickly.
Now, as always with new technology, it can be hard to sort of imagine how you would use this. As with Pokemon Go, if someone explained that to me, I don't think I would have understood it until I actually
now you can't quit playing.
Played it myself. But Alex, give us some ideas about how I, as a regular user, might benefit from this kind of technology.
Well, if you're, for example, IKEA, which has an augmented reality app, and at the moment the IKEA app allows you to place a virtual sofa into an image of your living room and walk around and see how it might look. What it can't do, for example, is hang a mirror on the wall or hang a picture on the wall. It is very good at dealing with horizontal planes, very bad at dealing with vertical planes. Well, not very bad, but not as good at dealing with vertical planes, and so it adds that sort of perception to it. It also means that I'm sure you've seen like the Walking Dead app, where you see zombies walking around your living room. Now, the moment a person approaches that zombie, it does not know there's a person there, and you could play some sort of interactive thing with your friend saying, hit him in the face, or God knows what.
I think it's hard. We know that you don't like zombies, and you haven't seen the Walking Dead.
I don't watch scary movies.
No,
since having children, no more scary movies.
But I think that I think it's hard to imagine what the uses might be. When desktop publishing first came around, people thought you'd take magazines and make them into like a PDF and deliver them that way. We didn't imagine that media would be Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. So the notions of what you can do with this are sort of unknown. I think we would look back on this conversation 5 years from now and laugh at what people are actually doing with this, because it's going to seem so obvious then, and it doesn't seem obvious to us now. I
mean, even with Face ID, which most people, and Animoji, which is the animated emoji which they have,
love it.
We did not know that it was going to be this
like
karaoke thing.
It's a new language.
Right, but the karaoke was the thing which would push Animoji. We couldn't have predicted, I think, 3 months ago. You're
seeing Craig Federighi try out some of these new features on the iPhone. All right, Alex, great scoop from you. Thanks so much for joining us. Alex Webb and our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. Coming up, Lyft continues to capitalize on Uber's rocky year. We'll talk to one investor in the ride-hailing company on its global expansion plans next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Mozilla rolled out a major update to its Firefox web browser Tuesday with a bevy of new features and one old frenemy, Google. In a blog post, Mozilla said Firefox's default search engine will be Google in the US, Canada, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. The agreement recalls a similar, older deal that was scuttled when Firefox and Google's Chrome web browser became better rivals. 3 years ago, Mozilla switched from Google to Yahoo as the default Firefox search provider in the US after Yahoo agreed to pay more than $300 million a year over 5 years. Well, Lyft has its foot on the gas as it drives its global expansion north to Canada. This will be the first time Lyft operates outside the United States. The ride-hailing company will start in Toronto and expand into Hamilton, Ontario next month. Lyft has been gaining market share in the U.S., pushing into territory long occupied by rival Uber. About 50,000 Toronto residents have downloaded the Lyft app this year, even though the service isn't yet available. Joining me now to discuss, Mayfield Fund's managing partner, Navin Chaddha. Mayfield invested in the Series A round in Lyft. So you guys invested $6 million in 2011. It's now worth $11 billion.
The valuation of the company is worth $11 billion, and our stake is a lot from where we invested.
So what do you make of their expansion finally outside the United States?
So I would say like Lyft is a great example of a company which is on to its mission of serving people, creating communities through transportation. Our aim is to build one of the biggest companies in the information technology industry. When we looked at Toronto, we believe it's the 4th largest city in North America. Culturally, we're very, very aligned with the people there. We did surveys. People really wanted a choice over the incumbent there. They're looking for inclusivity, they're looking for diversity, and above all, They want people to treat them well, whether it's the drivers or the consumers. And based on market research, we felt, you know what, the time is right for us to expand outside the US into the first country, which is nearby in North America, because there's a lot of demand for what we do.
So look, Uber expanded globally much more quickly, not always working out. Obviously, they've surrendered in China, in Russia, for example, but they do have the lead when it comes to international expansion. Was it the right call for Lyft to wait?
Absolutely right. Like, I have a belief, having been a serial entrepreneur and having seen Mayfield over 48 years, building a business is like a marathon. So our strong belief is you need to crawl, you need to walk, and you need to run. So first you need to become the good at something in the world that people love you. Once you conquer that market, then you have the right to expand into other markets. Let's take an example of Google. Google wasn't the first mover in search, but it's the biggest company today. There were people before Google, whether it was Yahoo, Lycos, Excite, and many more. So it's not necessary the first mover always takes the lion's share of the market, because as I mentioned earlier, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Obviously, Uber has had major challenges this year, and Lyft has gained market share in part as a result of that.
Yes, we have.
What do you think is the likelihood that Lyft can become not necessarily even an equal player to Uber in the US, but surpass Uber in the US?
So I would say we haven't disclosed the numbers, but
everybody wants to know what those numbers are.
Yeah, but I think what I can say is in many of the cities with all the data that has been published, I think we're running at parity compared to where we were. And if we keep on executing...
You think Uber and Lyft have the same market share in the US?
In many cities in the US, if you will. And you can look at third-party data from companies like Slice. You look at markets like San Francisco. You look at the General Bay Area. You look at the big metropolitan cities. We are doing extremely well based on third-party data. And I think if we continue on our focus of delighting customers, keep innovating on products, I think sky is the limit. Because at the end of the day, the brand we have built, this business has network effects, and we are a community-driven site who's looking at something more than just economic profit to itself. A good example is just in the last 12 to 18 months, Lyft drivers have made $350 million on commissions. So we are trying to give back to this whole trend of the 1099 economy. Micro-entrepreneurship is growing because of platforms like Lyft.
Right. Uber drivers have made a lot as well, but Lyft was first to the tips thing for sure. I want to talk about Poshmark. They just raised $87.5 million. E-commerce companies are fresh meat in a market where Amazon is by far the giant in the room. What makes you think that Poshmark has what it takes to have a long-term sustainable path?
Absolutely, right. So if I look at Poshmark, first of all, the market it's playing in globally is a $2.6 trillion fashion market. There is no leader in that space online, but we are not a retailer. We are a marketplace like Alibaba and eBay, where the business has network effects. We have 3 million stylists who are essentially sharing 8 million items a day. Plus, we have a community where our engagement metrics are at the same order of Facebook and Snap. So if you look at it, today, we're not an e-commerce company. We are the largest social commerce company for fashion. And when you have network effect with community, it's a very different model. We don't even basically take hold of inventory. It's a people-to-people thing where people started selling used merchandise, and now they've expanded to selling essentially like new merchandise, and we have put 3 million women in the business of creating online boutiques.
So when you look at the future of the e-commerce market, is it Amazon and everyone else? Or do you see sort of other larger players emerging, whether they're a straight e-commerce company or a social e-commerce company, as you call it?
Yes, so I think Amazon, as we all know, has 50% market share. So they will be the giant gorilla in the market, right? And which is always the case. If you look at Google, if you look at Microsoft in its markets. Could there be 10, 20, $30 billion market cap companies created along these massive markets? I think it's going to happen. You look at like offline retail in fashion, there's Louis Vuitton, right, which is very well known, right? Nordstrom is a great company that has been created. So this is not going to be in fashion, a winner-take-all market. Amazon does very well when you know what to buy. They'll provide you the cheapest thing, the fastest. The biggest problem in fashion is most people don't even know what to buy. That's what a community of 3 million stylists is essentially helping you curate and style for you what is best for you. Right. And that's the model Nordstrom pioneered with the offline concierge. So those are the things using technology we are seeing coming online today.
All right. Navin Chaddha, Managing Director of the Mayfield Fund, thank you so much for
it's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
Coming up, we will outline Airbnb's path to profitability despite a warning by Morgan Stanley about slowing growth. This is Bloomberg.
45% of the S&P 500 members, MACDs, are signaling
The UK luxury e-commerce platform Farfetch reported a bump in sales last year as global demand for high-end fashion continues to grow. Gross merchandise value, or the value of orders and services minus fees like taxes and shipping, increased to $718 million, an 81% jump from 2015. If you'll recall, JD.com bought a minority stake in Farfetch for $397 million in June, and JD CEO Richard Liu joined the startup's board, with both companies looking to boost sales in China. Now to an Airbnb milestone. The home and apartment rental startup pulled in about $1 billion in net revenue for the quarter ending in September. This according to people familiar with the financials. Airbnb first became profitable during the second half of 2016, but is still under pressure to justify its private valuation of $31 billion. The news comes after Morgan Stanley put out a report last week saying that Airbnb's growth was slowing down. Joining us now to discuss Bloomberg Tech's Olivia Zaleski, who covers startups and venture capital. So Olivia, $1 billion in net revenue. What do we take away from that?
I think it shows that this company is really growing. So that's $1 billion in net revenue for this past third quarter. Last year, the net revenue for that same quarter was about $500 million. So a huge acceleration in growth, and that acceleration is not slowing down. Actually, they're predicted to grow about 60% year over year compared to this time. Compared to the end of the year, compared to last year. So the company is really on the fast track, which is interesting because this Morgan Stanley report came out that said that growth was slowing down a bit, but the Morgan Stanley report actually, exactly. So the Morgan Stanley report really only looked at the U.S. and parts of Europe, and it only polled about 4,000 Airbnb users. And it didn't take into account these two huge new markets for the company, which is Latin America and China. So China saw about an 80% growth year over year, and Latin America saw 150% growth. So if you don't factor those in, yeah, it's going to look like the company is slowing down because it does appear that it is slowing a bit in the US and in parts of Europe. So it's such a small sampling.
At the same time, we also learned that Airbnb is and has been profitable. We don't know to what extent, but they're on a profitability streak. So that means for several quarters they've been profitable?
Right. So they've been profitable for about 17 months now, which is a really good sign. Most Silicon Valley upstarts are not yet profitable. We look at Uber, we look at WeWork, they're not there yet. Airbnb is there, and I think Brian Chesky has said that he expects to bring this company to the public markets within a year. So it's a really good sign, but they're going to have to continue to work pretty hard to justify that $31 billion valuation.
Now, you mentioned China. You said they're seeing growth there. At the same time, we've seen some tumult in the China leadership. The CEO of Airbnb in China recently had to leave.
Step down,
and we now know a little bit more about why.
We do.
Remind us what happened there. You've got Navin Charzik, the co-founder of Airbnb, taking over as chairman of China. What are the dynamics now at play?
So Hong stepped down basically for personnel reasons. We understand that there had been a relationship between him and another Airbnb colleague, and I think that the company felt it was appropriate that he leave, which is an interesting signal, in the age of Uber, where I think they're really trying to take a stance and say that they're not going to stand for that kind of behavior at that company. So yeah, definitely turmoil there, and China is such a huge, huge part of their growth and their forecasts. So they're going to have to make sure that that market is really well taken care of. So by putting Navin Charzik in charge there, I think it's a signal that they're taking it really seriously. But I do understand that they're still looking for leadership there, and it's really difficult to find somebody who wants to work for an American company in China, an American tech company in China, because it is so difficult to build a successful tech company.
Last quick question.
China, yeah.
Airbnb, you've got a call tomorrow with the global head of policy, Chris LeCain. What are we expecting?
Yeah, very colorful character. I think we'll expect a lot of jokes from him, and we're going to understand more about how Airbnb is competing with hotels.
All right. Olivia Zaleski, our Airbnb reporter, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, a shift in the massive operations of Amazon Web Services, and also having to do with China. Why the tech giant sold a big chunk of its cloud assets in China. Next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. At today's House Judiciary Committee hearing, Attorney General Jeff Sessions maintained he was unaware of Russian contacts with Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler pressed Sessions on a report that he rebuked former campaign advisor George Papadopoulos for suggesting a meeting between the Trump team and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He made some comment to that effect, as I remember after having read it in the newspaper.
I asked for yes or no. I don't have time.
Yes, all right.
There are reports that you shut George down, unquote, when he proposed that meeting with Putin. Is this correct, yes or no?
Yes. I pushed back. I'll just say it that way because it was...
yes. Your answer is yes.
The Attorney General insists his story has never changed. A lawyer for relatives of some Newtown school massacre victims has asked the Connecticut Supreme Court to reinstate a lawsuit against gunmaker Remington Arms. The suit claims a rifle made by the company and used in the shooting was too dangerous to sell to the public. A decision isn't expected for several months. 20 children and 6 educators were killed in that 2012 shooting. And the United Nations and its partners are alarmed at the worsening humanitarian situation in Yemen following the temporary closure of land, sea, and air borders on November 6th.
Yemen's conflict, which began in March 2015, has produced the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with 21 million people affected. 2 million internally displaced people, 1 million returnees, and 280,000 refugees and asylum seekers are all struggling to survive through increasingly prolonged displacement.
The World Health Organization announced a rise in suspected cases of diphtheria. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington, 6:30 Wednesday morning now in Hong Kong. We are joined by Bloomberg's David Ingles with a look at the markets. David, we had some losses here on Wall Street, but finished off the lows of the session.
Well, that's the hope, I guess, that we feel a little bit of the tailwind coming through in the Asia-Pacific. But that being said, I'm looking at futures right now, and chances are we're going to get losses at the open. When markets get going here, Australia opens up top of the next hour. We're looking at about 1/4% declines there, 1/3% when you look at Japan. We're looking at stronger currencies and, of course, fairly wary of what the drop in commodity prices the last 12 hours or so might do when markets in Australia might open up. Just one last thing, of course, GDP comes out of Japan, so hopefully we get a positive catalyst there. But at the moment, I'm looking across Asia right now. We're looking at a negative tilt. I'm David Ingles here in Hong Kong. More from B-Tech coming up next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Amazon Web Services is undergoing some big changes in China. The tech giant is selling some of its Chinese cloud assets to its local partner, all in order to comply with local regulations. The company clarified the move in a statement, saying AWS did not sell its business in China and remains fully committed. We're excited about the significant business we have and its growth potential over the next number of years. Keep in mind, the cloud market in China could be worth $30 billion for Amazon. So what happens now? Joining us now in New York, Matt McIlwain, Managing Director of Madrona Venture Group with $1.3 billion in assets under management. Matt has more than 20 years of investing in tech experience, mainly in the Seattle region, and has invested in dozens of startups. So Matt, what do you make of this move by Amazon? At the same time, it's no secret that Alibaba has been eating Amazon's lunch in China.
Well, I think this is much more of a political move than an economic move, although I think you're right, Emily. It's a competitive market in China, and not only Alibaba, but increasingly Huawei and potentially others, including Tencent, are going to compete hard for the cloud business over in China. So I think what Amazon's saying is, hey, we had to comply with this, but we're committed to finding a way to win in China. I would imagine in a couple weeks at their big reInvent conference that they'll be announcing some things about continued global expansion and new initiatives.
Plenty of U.S. technology companies have tried and failed in China, whether it's Facebook or Google or Amazon's e-commerce business. Do you think that Amazon has a chance to win in the cloud market in China?
Well, I think one of the reasons they have a chance to win, and I don't think they're going to be at all the only winner in China, but they have such a lead in cloud computing services, and pretty much everybody else is embracing the standards that AWS has set out over the last 10 years. And so to that extent, if they can bring customers with them and they have a market opportunity to grow through those customers, I think they have a chance to win, although the combination of strong players like Alibaba plus some of the pretty significant regulatory advantages that you enjoy as a Chinese-based company in China are going to make it hard for them.
Meantime, on the home front, Microsoft and Google are nipping at Amazon's heels. How much progress do you think those two companies are making vis-a-vis Amazon, and how threatened should AWS feel?
Well, I think that Microsoft's making more progress, and Google's still in a challenging situation. Microsoft's making progress because they've got strong leadership in applications, and they've got a much greater presence on-premise, and those are things that AWS doesn't have, and so there's significant advantages for Microsoft. What Google's trying to push really hard on is a combination of the fact that they've done a lot of early investing in deep learning, and they can make deep learning services available to their customers, as well as they have their own set of applications, of course, with Google Docs, Google Mail, etc. And they have a lot of resources and cash on the balance sheet that they can be more aggressive at winning certain types of customers.
So let's talk about, we've been talking for the last few days about Alibaba and Singles Day, which just happened. Now we're coming up on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, which is big in the U.S. and big for a company like Amazon. And yet the importance of Black Friday is declining as we're seeing sales all year round, as we're seeing more shopping spread out across the year. Do you think Black Friday is going to become a thing of the past?
Well, I don't think Black Friday is going to become a thing of the past. I mean, the physical world retailers still need to figure out ways to bring people into their stores and to grow their businesses or rejuvenate their businesses. And of course, we've seen Amazon make their own $15 billion investment, admittedly in high-end grocery store business, but they understand that the worlds of the digital realm and the physical realm are increasingly coming together. So I don't expect Black Friday to be a thing of the past, but it'll be a combination of understanding the digital and physical world. And I think Cyber Monday, which takes place a couple weeks after Black Friday, will also be a very important measurement point in the annual cycle of who's winning and who's losing in holiday retail.
We were just up in Seattle a few weeks ago, and all the talk was about Amazon and HQ2, which is a big loss for Seattle, the fact that Amazon is looking to open a new headquarters somewhere else. I even asked Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS, where he thought the winds were blowing, and he said that is above his pay grade, which means it's up to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, because that's the only person above his pay grade. But how big a loss is HQ2 for the Seattle area in general?
Well, look, I think it's a massive disappointment that Amazon feels that there's a set of things in terms of talent, in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of a spirit of partnership with the city government that would lead them to put out this, RFP basically for a second headquarters. But my more provocative point of view on this is I'm not sure that Amazon's ultimately going to pick a second headquarters. I think that one of the things they're learning with that 238 submissions is that there's a number of centers of excellence around the country. And while I have no inside knowledge on this, although we have very long history and close relationship with Amazon and AWS, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up picking major centers of excellence for machine learning and robotics, or maybe logistics and retail and other such areas across North America as they ultimately make decisions come sometime next year. But having said that, it's disappointing that Seattle has not worked as closely together with Amazon to figure out a way to be the true one and only day one and day forever headquarters.
Interesting speculation there, Matt. I'm curious, what do you think it means for the tech scene in Seattle, which has been rising? Obviously, you still have giants like Amazon and Microsoft based there, but do you think it's a blow for the startup scene as well? No is the short answer. Here's a couple reasons why. I mean, we do have 2 of the top 5 by market cap companies in the world. The only other place that has 2 is, of course, Silicon Valley, and they have 3. And so we have Microsoft and Amazon, but even those other 3, which are Apple, Google, and Facebook, have major presences up in Seattle. And so, in fact, what I hear from our startups more often is how hard it is to compete for talent with the big companies. And the fact that Amazon's going to still invest in a broad variety of areas, they're still taking down significant space in downtown and greater Seattle. They're going to be bringing talent to Seattle for a long time to come. So we'd like to have it all. We understand why they're going to have major presences, just like Google has over 3,000 employees in Seattle. Amazon's going to choose to do that in other geographies. But I don't think it's a blow to the startup scene. In fact, I think that ultimately it might make it a little easier for startups to compete for some of the great talent that's already come to know and be in Seattle. All right, Matt McIlwain with Madrona Venture Group. As always, Matt, great to have you here on the show. Meantime, YouTube has just announced a partnership with Ticketmaster. The site will begin featuring upcoming U.S. tour dates on hundreds of recording artists' YouTube videos. The feature enables users to click through to buy tickets via Ticketmaster. The deal will first be rolled out in North America, with plans to expand globally. Coming up, as the GOP tax overhaul continues to work its way through Congress, a provision is getting opposition from the startup and VC community. We will explain next. This is Bloomberg. Crucial details of U.S. tax reform are still being worked out in the halls of Congress. But one provision is grabbing the attention of the tech community. The Senate version of the bill requires employees to pay tax on stock options at the time they vest, rather than when they are exercised. This would greatly impact the startup world, where employees are lured by the possible payoff of the company's stock options, but it takes years to know what they're worth. Here to discuss, we're joined by our Bloomberg tech editor, Alistair Barr, and still with us in New York, Matt McIlwain, Managing Director of Madrona Ventures. So, Alistair, let me start with you. There are some good things for tech in these bills, some bad things, and the House and Senate bills are different. Break it down for us.
Yeah, so the Senate bill is the one that everyone in Silicon Valley is freaking out about. It basically means that if you're a startup employee, you get stock awarded to you the moment it vests, which basically means you just have a stock option. That is the moment when you're taxed, and that is the reason that's causing so much consternation is because, oftentimes a lot of startups fail, they don't work out, so these stock options might be worth nothing, but you're going to be taxed on the value when you get them.
Right, so you'd be taxed yearly or monthly as they vest, essentially. Right. But the House bill is more favorable to tech employees. It's like the opposite.
It's the opposite. So basically, it basically delays when you have to pay tax on your stock options, which everyone would be much more comfortable with, and it would give people a lot more flexibility about how and when they pay tax.
So these are just one part of these bills. Matt, how big an impact would these two different scenarios have on the startup community?
Well, the first thing to say about this is that I think it's generally good and generally accepted that having simplified tax reform is going to help the economy overall, and that's good for the innovation community that we live in. Having said that, the Senate provision is particularly bad. As Alistair was just sharing, there's really three issues with it. First of all, these are stock options. This is not even something that I own today, and in many cases, I don't have the right to exercise those options and actually own them outright. That's called an early exercise provision. So I'm being taxed on something I don't even own yet. Secondarily, the idea of having to pay because I vested in some shares that I still, as an option, don't own yet is kind of like saying if your house started appreciating in value and you had to pay taxes on the appreciation before you sold it. And then, as Alistair points out, you get this whole notion of volatility. So I might have to pay a tax on something, and then, because it happens sometimes, companies don't work out or they sell at a price below that value, or they even have a down round financing, and then I've paid a higher tax on something that's worth less. So for three reasons, the Senate proposal just doesn't make any sense to me and would be a negative on the tech community.
Is the House proposal fair, though?
Well, I don't think the House proposal is a necessary thing. It is a little bit more generous in how it treats the situation for stock options, but I don't think we should be pounding on the table for that. I'd much rather have simplification overall and understand that different kinds of loopholes are either going to be closed or not created. And so I think that, in the balance of things that ultimately get done here, and again, I'm very hopeful that we do get major tax reform, the House piece is a little bit generous, but I'd be much more concerned about that Senate piece because that could really have some, it's illogical and it would have some negative impacts on, kind of the startups. Because the last thing I would say is, and hopefully this is not the case, but a lot of big companies, right, don't have this issue because they're using basically cash compensation to retain their employees in a limited extent, RSUs or restricted stock units. It's quite a different equation for them. And so this is significantly to the disadvantage of private companies and earlier stage companies.
Right. So Alistair, there's a lot of other provisions here. How would they affect the tech industry?
I was going to pick up on one thing Matt said. It strikes me that when you add up all these things, it's bad for smaller tech companies and relatively good for big companies. So the one big one is the overall corporate tax rate down to 20% is great. And then they might get a lower tax rate to bring back all that cash from overseas. That's good. Some of the bad stuff is that they're thinking about taxing intellectual property, income made from intellectual property. And that type of thing is the basis of how some of these big tech companies avoid paying tax overseas. Apple uses basically those Irish subsidiaries. That's where all their IP sits, and then they charge licensing fees to all these other places, and that's how they avoid paying so much tax overseas.
Matt, we've got about 30 seconds left. What are your thoughts about some of these additional provisions?
Well, I do think that the tax repatriation and the changing to a territorial system is good for the overall tech ecosystem, particularly good in the United States. Not only will there be more capital for these bigger companies to invest and grow innovation, but perhaps to partner, perhaps to acquire early stage companies. So I think that's good. And simplification is often very much better, as we've seen in Washington State with a no-income tax system and a simplified system that really helps grow our economy disproportionate to the rest of the country.
All right, Matt McIlwain, Madrona Venture Group, thank you as always. Alistair Barr, our tech editor, thanks for breaking down all of the nuances for us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, why lower oil prices made the Gulf region open up to new ideas and opportunities for cloud companies. We'll hear from the chief executive of Bahrain's Economic Development Board next. This is Bloomberg. Microsoft has joined a growing number of companies pledging to curb their emissions. The world's biggest software company by revenue set a new target to cut carbon dioxide by 75% by 2030. The goal is aligned with the landmark Paris Agreement. Microsoft made the announcement during the United Nations annual climate conference, where a group of businesses and U.S. state leaders have voiced support for the Paris deal despite President Trump's plan to withdraw. Well, lower oil prices have presented an economic challenge for many countries in the Gulf region, but one big player in the region sees a silver lining, in part due to tech companies and the rise of cloud services. Here's Khalid Al-Rumaihi, Chief Executive of Bahrain's Economic Development Board, with our Bloomberg editor-at-large, Eric Schatzker.
The challenge in finances is, generally the drop in oil prices has actually been a blessing in disguise. It's actually forced governments to take on policy changes and law changes that has been for the benefit, I think, of attracting investment. So you've seen some of those changes.
That would have previously been very unpopular.
Absolutely. At $100 oil, I don't think we would have seen the opening up of sectors, the changes in, because governments necessarily need to attract FDI. And so it's made my job a lot easier. And so, we've seen, at least in the EDB, the investment attraction double from 2014 to 2015. We went from 140 million to 280 million in 2016, and we're going to see over 700 million in 2017. That's dollars. So
in foreign direct investment.
In foreign direct investment coming just through the EDB. So we're seeing record numbers coming in to the Kingdom of Bahrain, and I think it's down to A, the openness that the economy has always had, but that's increased in the recent past, and then B, I think because the government is looking to attract investors to take up the slack that the government is going to leave behind as it manages its fiscal balance. On Saudi, I think it's good news. I think people look at the region and they see it as a zero-sum game. If the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia grows, what will it do to the other states? We don't say that about Asia. We see Singapore, we see Malaysia, we see Hong Kong, different city-states succeeding, and the success of one leads to the benefit of the others. And I think we're going to see that in the Gulf.
So $700 million in foreign direct investment through the Economic Development Board.
Absolutely.
In 2017. What about 2018?
Well, it's going to be hard to match that number. I suspect that we are going to exceed 300 to 400 million. 17 was unique. We managed to attract Amazon Web Services to set up their data centers, what they call a region in Bahrain. It's the first investment.
Cloud hosting hub?
It's a data center, a data farm, or a server farm that's going to serve the entire Middle East and Africa. And we looked at the Middle East and Africa and saw an absence of data centers. And we were encouraged by Amazon looking to set up something, and we convinced them to choose Bahrain.
So that's happening.
That's under construction. We're going to see that launched by the first quarter of 2019. It's a game changer. It's a game changer for Bahrain. It's a game changer for the region. It's going to bring supercomputing power to the fingertips of startups and small businesses. It's going to allow people to move workloads to the cloud. They're going to enhance security. It's going to reduce cost. And as a government, we're going to adopt a cloud-first policy. We're going to ask every government entity, not will you move to the cloud, why won't you move to the cloud? And we've seen just in the initial steps that we've taken, we've saved 90% of our costs by avoiding building our own data centers and moving to the cloud with Amazon and hopefully with others as well.
What was the dollar figure on that investment by Amazon?
I can't disclose that because Amazon's very protective of that number, but it's a significant investment.
And is there more that Bahrain can do with Amazon?
Absolutely. We'd love to talk to them about other lines of business, but we'd also like to talk to, and we are talking to, Google, Microsoft. We want our whole country to be a host to several of the leading companies, not to have sales offices, but to actually have something of substance, hopefully in the cloud. And
more data centers, in other words.
More data centers, and we think this is a catalyst to develop a digital economy in the country that would serve the entire Middle East. We think that data is growing in importance. We see it in the terms of our, supercomputers in our pocket, our mobile phones. And we think that the Middle East shouldn't be neglecting that element. And we think it's going to empower businesses.
So Amazon is a done deal. How close are you to getting Google or Microsoft, two companies you just named, to make similar commitments?
We're in conversations with them. They first have to obviously see the potential in the region, which I'm sure they do, and they do. And then the second element is obviously making them see the benefits of Bahrain. So we're in conversations. I can't say that we're close to concluding anything, but we're hopeful.
Would you go so far as to predict that one of those conversations will result in an agreement before the end of this year and next year?
I don't want to speculate, but hopefully we can reach some kind of conclusion.
That was the chief executive of the Bahrain Economic Development Board, Khalid Al Rumaihi, talking with our own Eric Schatzker. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.